And so we begin with prayer. I invite you to get comfortable and join me in consciousness. Together we know there's one life, one power, one absolute intelligence that we call God. This power is greater than anything that our mind can imagine, yet we know that we're one with it, and that it comes into being through us and as us. As an individual expression of this one mind, we know that we're an avenue through which it expresses. We know that the universe is an unlimited system, and we are unlimited in our personal expression of good. We know that we are health, wealth, love, and freedom of creative self-expression. We know that right now we are open and receptive to the living spirit of truth, to new ideas. As we move through this session, we are open to new ideas about the teachers and teachings and the basic principles of New Thought. We are aware of Spirit's presence, and we know that wherever we are on holy ground. In this eternal abundance, we live and move and have our being. Happiness, joy, harmony, and prosperity are the natural results of living in this consciousness of opulence. We recognize ourselves as spiritual beings with an unlimited source. We give thanks for this truth and accept it right now. And so it is. Well, welcome back to part 2 of our class, New Thought Basics. And before we get started, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of where it is that we're going in this section. We're going to be taking a look at the key figures in New Thought, and these are just some select people that I think it's important for you to know, because as we move through the Cornerstone classes, I probably will refer to them. I may give you some of their writings or thoughts. So I just want to kind of set them up for you in the timeline, give you an idea of who they are and what they've accomplished within our movement, and also we'll move from there into basic principles. And again, these are just that, basic principles. These are the things that we'll be exploring in depth, and we'll take some points of discussion in later classes, but we need to kind of get an idea of where we are in our spiritual belief system. So these are, again, all examined in depth or in greater analysis as you move through the courses. And the teachers and teachings is really Cornerstone 4. So at that point, we'll really be taking time to examine those teachers and their teachings and their contributions. So just know that you're going to get more information later, but for now, you're getting what you need. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much detail on these people. We really want to stick with principles right now. And one thing I wanted to mention is the resources that are available to you also within your class module homepage. There is a document section, and that document section is kind of an overall bibliography of books and writings that I not only present within the lectures, but may throw out when I'm talking. So as I come across them myself in reviewing these lectures, I will include those for you if you want to go find them. Secondly, I want to point out the links that we have to the Centers for Spiritual Living, which are the churches that are come from the Science of Mind and the Religious Science movement, and also the Unity churches, which are national churches and can be found anywhere. And these are really New Thought churches Not much difference between them, really. You'll find a wonderful spiritual home in them, but if you really want to kind of actively become involved in our teaching, I would encourage you to go there and listen to their ministers and just try it out and see if you can connect, and I know you will, with like-minded individuals who will become part of a great spiritual fellowship for you. So just kind of a plug for our churches out there, and thanks again for joining us for part 2. Let's get started. Okay, so let's begin our brief examination of some of the key figures in New Thought. And the first I want to start with is Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, which you see here on the family tree in the upper left-hand corner. And Phineas Parkhurst Quimby was born in 1802, so the early, or beginning really, of the 1800s. He is considered to be the father of New Thought. He was born in New Hampshire, but spent much of his life in Belfast, Maine, where his trade was a clockmaker. But in the 1830s, he learned about mesmerism, or what today we would know as hypnosis. And he became an expert mesmerist. And he gave demonstrations of mesmerism and to some extent its healing powers. And what's kind of interesting is it was kind of vaudevillian, really, when he was demonstrating his mesmerism. He sort of was on stage, rose up from the stage in smoke and kind of in a Merlin hat or sorcerer's hat with robes, and performed this mesmerism. But the showmanship subsided. He started to question the accepted theories of what was happening in mesmerism, and he started to develop his own system of spiritual healing. And in this new system, the emphasis was on the action of God. Mesmerism was really about, or hypnosis even today, is really about suggestion, or the idea of thought transference of one human mind to the other, instead of the unification of two minds, or the self-knowing of a mind as it relates to healing. So he believed at this point that he had rediscovered the healing method of Jesus. So he had a direct attribution of the healing power to the divine. He really didn't have a lot of formal education, but he was very aware of philosophical thought. He studied a lot of it. And his own system of thought went by many names. He changed it throughout time, but at least once he referred to it as Christian Science, and that's important because Mary Baker Eddy, who was the founder of the Christian Science Church, denounced Quimby later, said that she brought no ideas from her time with him when she sought him for healing and studied his writings. But it is interesting to note that he had called his own teaching Christian Science for a time. So he had some basic beliefs that we share one life, and that our life is determined by beliefs, and that our life responds to these beliefs, that our beliefs can be changed, and that affects our life, that we exist within one universal spirit, and that divine intelligence is available to us. And these are, of course, the very basic tenets of New Thought. The concept of omnipresent wisdom, and also the concept of the Christ within, or God within, the principle of divine sonship, that we have inherent in us the power of the divine. So I just want to point out some texts, as I will do, and the details of these texts, their authors, are in the document section online for you. There's also a great website which is focused entirely on Quimby and his teachings, and that information is there as well. but you see this book, Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, his complete writings and beyond. The Quimby manuscripts. Quimby never really wrote a book per se. He was extremely busy in his practice of healing, so he kept meticulous notes and manuscripts, which were later incorporated into books of his manuscripts, and those really didn't surface until about 1920. So he really drops out of sight for quite a while, which is why a lot of people believe he's lost in the translation as the father of New Thought, but certainly in the last few decades he has resurfaced, and we know his influence, and he has been restored to his rightful place. One of my favorite books on Quimby is called Mingling Minds, and it's Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, Science of Health and Happiness. And this was another sort of term he gave to his teaching, the science of health and happiness. So again, you're seeing the idea of science as it relates to spiritual belief, and the science of mind, which was a term that was thrown about even during Quimby's day. This book is by Irvin Seal. It's an excellent sort of introduction to Quimby, and I'd recommend it if you want to do further study on Quimby. Okay, so we are moving along, and we are going to talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is an early influencer of what became the New Thought movement. And while he is not directly a teacher, he was studied by most, if not all, of the major teachers within our movement. So let's talk a little bit about Emerson. Emerson started his career as a Unitarian minister. And the Unitarian Church is different, and it is not the same as the Unity Church. A lot of people think it is or get the two confused. But the Unitarian Church really dates back to the beginnings of American religion and beliefs. But he was a Unitarian minister, later a preeminent lecturer, essayist, and of course philosopher of 19th century America. He was a key figure in what was known as the New England Renaissance and influenced many other great writers, including Henry David Thoreau. At his home in Concord, Massachusetts, he sort of held court with a lot of transcendentalists and philosophers of his time. And their influence really did a lot to begin to open the Unitarian Church to new ideas, a new liberal approach to science, the Eastern religions, and kind of naturalistic mysticism. So they did have a direct influence on religious beliefs of their time. He was a descendant of a number of noteworthy New England ministers. And his father was a distinguished minister with a church in Boston who drew his congregation with him into Unitarianism. And so we see where Emerson gets his spiritual influence, which he kind of shakes up later, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But his other major influence in his childhood was his Aunt Mary. This was his father's unmarried sister, and she was really kind of a rebel in thought. She introduced Emerson to the Hindu scriptures, to the ideas of Neoplatonism, which we talked about in New Thought Antecedents. And his letters to Aunt Mary in the 1820s really show how Emerson's distinctive beliefs start to emerge. So in 1826, he attended the Harvard Divinity School. He became a Unitarian pulpit minister. He had a church, but he was criticized for his interpretation of the Bible scripture. He refused to take communion or he wouldn't serve it actually, the sacrament of communion, because he believed that his members construed the meaning of the rite differently than he did. So he resigned the pulpit and decided that his vocation was not the ministry after all. So he did believe, though, his ideas were consistent with the teachings of Jesus. He later gave an address to the graduating class of ministers at the Harvard Divinity School. And this was huge. This document, if you ever have a chance to look at it, I'd recommend it. It's fascinating. He really calls these teaching ministers and the belief system to question. And it was acclaimed and it was criticized. Some called it sublime, some called it the latest form of blasphemy, but it nonetheless sparked huge discussions in the belief system prevalent at the time. He harshly dismissed in the address the emphasis on the miracles of the Bible, and instead highlighted his own emphasis on the soul and the personal and self-evident experience of the divine. So this is really important, that we have direct access to the divine. And you can see why this idea threatens traditional religions and churches. The idea of you going to the divine directly and experiencing or affecting self-growth is kind of anti-establishment and not good for business. So it was an unwelcome confirmation, sort of Orthodox teachings, but important for us in New Thought, certainly. Emerson didn't really like the term transcendentalism. He preferred idealism, which dealt with the realm of ideas. And so while we use the term idealism or idealistic differently today, it was relating directly to the existence of ideas and how they relate to us. He believed transcendentalism was really a protest against kind of the formalism, the dogmatic teachings in religion, and that it really was not a philosophical movement, but really a spiritual movement that was looking toward a spiritual faith. So you will see in Emerson's writings, they largely have a lot to do with spirituality. He did take up other causes. He was really at the forefront of the anti-slavery movement, among other things, but we are concerned with his writings as they relate to spirituality. His essay, of course, Self-Reliance, which is extremely well known to us today, was published in 1841. It regarded the self and the idea of self-sufficiency, and he believed that in order for us to be self-reliant, we needed to stop and listen to the still small voice of God within. So here again we see the idea that we have direct access to the divine within ourselves. And he regarded the true self or the ideal self as innately capable of a natural experience with God, and that the evidence of the divine, or that the knowledge of the divine that we have, is present in all creation. So the idea of omnipresence and our direct access to the divine. So Emerson becomes a very important figure for us in New Thought. His influence in kind of being counter traditional religion and really having revolutionary thought in our way of thinking about God, and really positing some very powerful arguments against dogmatic teachings. I want to just show you two books. Again, these are included in the document section, One's called The Spiritual Emerson. The other is also called The Spiritual Emerson, two books which relate directly to Emerson and his spiritual beliefs, but I just want you to show you that there are books out there that deal with the spiritual side of Emerson's beliefs directly. And here is a page from the Harvard Divinity School address, which I can't emphasize enough is a fascinating document. You can find it online and read it in its entirety, but it really will give you an idea of this kind of bucking of tradition and this questioning of traditional beliefs and the inception of new ideas. And those new ideas really, really trickle down into New Thought. So he is extremely influential in his thought system. And so let's now move into Melinda Kramer and Nona Brooks, who were the founders of what became the Divine Science churches. These were the first sort of founders of churches in our movement. And Divine Science is more obscure today, but is working to reinvigorate itself and regain its prominence. I myself am an ordained Divine Science minister. So I have a great love for these teachings and this church. They are the most absolute in their ideas, meaning that they rely directly on the omnipresence of God and are very absolute in their teaching. Now, I want to distinguish this as one of the first, or the first church in New Thought from Christian Science, because Christian Science was really not a New Thought church, although it certainly influenced them. So I want to start with Melinda Kramer and Nona Brooks. Melinda Kramer is often overlooked as one of the early important leaders of the New Thought movement. She was born a Quaker, and early in her life she had a disease which the doctors said was incurable, that she'd be an invalid, and so she moved to San Francisco hoping that the weather would cure her, which it did not. But she had an epiphany in 1885 while in prayer, and in that prayer she had a great realization of the omnipresence of God, and that this realization would free her from the bondage to her ill health. And she discovered that as she changed her beliefs about herself and her relationship to God, she was indeed freed from her pain and ill health. So she kind of had a self-discovery of New Thought through prayer. And this is important to us. She studied with the teacher of teachers, Emma Curtis Hopkins, who we'll talk about in a little bit. And bit by bit, she let go of her old habits and beliefs and affected healing in her life. And she became a major teacher of New Thought, and she called her teachings Divine Science. She responded to her calling as a teacher and healer, but always recognizing that the power of God was that which was affecting healing in her life. So she founded the Divine Science Home School in 1888. She incurred an injury during the 1905 San Francisco earthquake, which she did not recover from, and died the following year in 1906. Unfortunately, the earthquake and ensuing fire took much of the Divine Science Home School, and its contents were destroyed. So we have lost many of the original writings of the Divine Science movement, but there are some publications that we have today by the founders of the Divine Science movement. Nona Brooks was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1861. She had two sisters, Fanny and Althea. Fanny Brooks James and Althea Brooks Small, along with Nona Brooks, became founders also of a Divine Science Church. And it's interesting to note that Charles Fillmore was associated with Fanny's husband in real estate prospecting in Pueblo, California, or Colorado. So there's a connection between the Brooks sisters and Charles Fillmore. So just a kind of point of synchronicity there. But much of her family was in poor health. Nona herself had a serious throat ailment. She really couldn't eat solid foods. She lost a lot of weight. They thought that she would die from it. And a woman that was an associate of Nona's older sister Althea, named Mrs. Bingham, was ill as well, and she was referred to a specialist in Chicago. And a friend of hers had taken classes with Emma Curtis Hopkins and recommended that she seek her out and see if she might be healed. And Mrs. Bingham returned home extremely enthusiastic about her healing and her discoveries under the tutelage of Emma Curtis Hopkins, and she had a great desire to help other people. And so she encouraged the Brooks sisters to attend a class about what she learned from Mrs. Hopkins. And the sisters were reluctant. They had a strict Presbyterian upbringing, but they eventually relented. And in the class, Mrs. Bingham continually stressed the idea of omnipresence, that God is everywhere, God is all, God is here. And these are the basic tenets of the Divine Science Church. And the sisters attended the classes, they listened, they kept repeating whatever she asked them to, and then one day Nona realized that she was healed. And this brought her into a deeper faith of the consciously realized omnipresence of God. She brought her ideas of healing to many, many people. She became a teacher of what she called divine science, which she got from Melinda Kramer. She asked her permission to use that term to describe what she taught. And the Brooks sisters and Melinda Kramer came into some concordance in their teachings of divine science. And she said that the teachings are scientific in that they're proven by our experience, and that they're divine in that their subject concerns the understanding of God as the omnipotent source of all. So there you see where we get spirituality and science coming together in one belief system. And so Melinda Kramer and the Brooks sisters, as I said, worked together for years and brought to us really the divine science teaching and movement, and were huge influencers on what was to come later on. So now let's draw some attention to Mary Baker Eddy, an interesting and controversial figure in the New Thought movement. She was certainly an influencer in the movement, but we don't really include Christian Science as a New Thought church. It certainly has some beliefs that are very similar, but her place in the history is important. She founded the Christian Science Church, and she was, I would say, one of the most remarkable figures of the 20th century for her time. She was born in New Hampshire, came from Puritan biblical values, and she was in ill health, and doctors at that time could really find no cure for her. So she was a seeker of alternative treatments, and she heard about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby and sought him out for treatment. And through her sessions with Quimby, she was healed. She brought along with her from Quimby some of his writings, and many years later, in 1875, she wrote and published Science and Health with the Key to the Scriptures, which was the main textbook of Christian Science. In 1879, she founded the First Church of Christ Scientist. And what was important about that church was the recognition of the mind-body connection. She discounted and dismissed Phineas Parkhurst Quimby as a mesmerist and nothing more, did not attribute any of her ideas or teachings to him. She said they were divinely inspired, and that Quimby made no connection to God or to Jesus Christ in his healings. So it's just a point of reference. It's really not meant to be a condemnation of Etty. We have to give her a lot of credit. She was a pioneer in terms of really bucking the system, traditional beliefs, traditional religions as a woman in the late 1800s. This was really revolutionary. So she was kind of a tough cookie. She really had a very strong hold over the Christian Science Church and its teachings. She taught her followers that they were to study only her teachings and nobody else's, because some of her followers became interested in the works of Quimby, which were emerging, and so she told them that they could not study that and study nothing but her system. So nonetheless, she spawned a great deal of new thinking, of new ideas about religion and how to approach it from a personal standpoint, and made the body-mind connection and the inherent power of the individual to heal. So she really has to be recognized for her extraordinary leadership at a time when women were repressed, and also her influence on Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was her student. And so we have to put her in her rightful place, and so we do, and recognize what she did and accomplished. So Mary Baker Eddy lived from 1821 to 1910, and she wrote, of course, Science and Health with the Key to the Scriptures that I mentioned before. And there is a book called The Life of Mary Baker Eddy, one of many, of course, which really talks about the rise and decline of Christian Science. And I'll be touching on that in our next class. We'll be using that as an example of how forward thinking and new thought is subject to really what all religions become subject to if they refuse to grow with the evolution of thought. So I wanted to point this book out to you. So now I want to talk about Emma Curtis Hopkins. And there's so much to be said about Emma Curtis Hopkins. She really was the mother of New Thought. She's called the teacher of teachers. She is referred to as a lost founder. There's been debate about whether she's the founder or Quimby is the founder, which really doesn't matter. What really matters is her great influence on so many people within our movement. Her forward thinking, her ideas, and I really have no doubt that there really couldn't have been an Emma Curtis Hopkins without a Mary Baker Eddy and without a Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. So in a sense, to me, she really is sort of the Paul to Christianity. It was really the work of Paul who brought Christianity, which was a relatively insignificant and small movement of followers on the teachings of Jesus, to the world. And Emma Curtis Hopkins was sort of that to New Thought. She was a primary theologian, teacher, writer, a feminist, and mystic, and a prophet who ordained women into what she called Christian Science. Now, she did get into a legal battle with Mary Baker Eddy, who said she retained exclusive rights to the term Christian Science. And at the time of Emma Curtis Hopkins, Christian Science was the vernacular. People considered themselves Christian Scientists who were part of the New Thought movement. So Mary Baker Eddy won her case. Emma Curtis Hopkins had to discontinue the use of the name Christian Science Theological Seminary, which she founded in Chicago, and she had to change the name. So she had a falling out with Mary Baker Eddy. She was the editor of her magazine, and she wanted to study Eastern thought. She wanted to study things outside of Mary Baker Eddy's writings. They had a disagreement over whether matter was real or not real. Again, so much to be said here, but she was really excommunicated from the Christian Science Church, and so she went out and started her own way of thinking, and it was a more eclectic form of Christian Science. It dealt with metaphysical idealism, which we know as New Thought today. It had within it certain traits of Gnosticism, which were the mystical teachings, and the Gnostics were the mystical followers of Jesus. They were quashed, and we'll talk about that in our next class. And what became the modern church today does not contain those teachings, but they are surfacing in a lot of gospels that were destroyed, including the Gospel of Thomas and Mary Magdalene. But Hopkins was a free spirit. She was comfortable including the ideas of theosophy, a wide variety of Eastern teachings, and so she really was a revolutionary in thought. She also introduced the idea of God as mother and father, of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And within that thought system, she really believed that the role of women and their prominence in the Godhead was changing, and that in that way she was bringing her feminism to spirituality. And so we have in New Thought not really a religion, but it's considered by many to be one of the great American-born religions. Many of, if not all of, the prominent religions in America were brought to this country. They were not conceived in this country. So this was born in America. And so that is significant in our study of New Thought. So she's called the teacher of teachers, or the mother of New Thought, because the Fillmores, the founders of Unity, Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, Melinda Kramer and Nona Brooks, the founders of divine science, Emily Cady, the author of the Lessons in Truth, which is the Unity textbook, all studied with or were influenced by Emma Curtis Hopkins. And her final work, her magnum opus, is called High Mysticism. It was her masterpiece, and it is considered today one of the greatest of all works on mysticism. So she was a great leader, a great pioneer in thought for us today. There is a great book called Emma Curtis Hopkins, the Forgotten Founder of New Thought. Really a fun book, interesting book, really chronicles her life, really gets into sort of the drama between her and Mary Baker Eddy. Really recommend it. Think it's a great book and really highlights this great woman. And then, of course, her book, High Mysticism, one of many, but her last. And really not an easy read, but certainly a huge contribution to our collection of texts within our movement, and really some magnificent and beautiful philosophies. Okay, so now let's talk about Myrtle and Charles Fillmore. And I just want to say that they really are kind of the personification of the expressions of the feminine and masculine divine. Myrtle really focused her work on healing and really was a heart-centered individual. Not that Charles wasn't, but Charles Fillmore really wrote prolifically on mental science and metaphysics. So they really are a beautiful union. Charles Sherlock Fillmore was born in 1854 in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And when he was a child, he had an ice skating accident which injured his hip and left him with kind of a limp and a lifelong disability. He had little formal education, but he did study the Bible, and he studied other authors, including Emerson, works on spiritualism and Eastern religions. Myrtle Page, which became later Myrtle Fillmore, was born in Pagetown, Ohio. She met Charles Fillmore, her future husband, in Denison, Texas in the mid-1870s. They were married in Missouri in 1881, at which time they moved to Pueblo, Colorado. They were involved in real estate speculation, and I said earlier that he was in business with the brother-in-law of Nona Brooks, so there is a connection there to the founders of divine science. After the birth of their sons, they moved to Kansas City in 1884, and in 1886 they attended New Thought classes held by a gentleman called Dr. E.B. Weeks, who was a representative of Emma Curtis Hopkins and her teachings. And as a result of attending those classes and embodying those beliefs, Myrtle recovered from chronic tuberculosis. She attributed her recovery to the use of prayer and methods she used in the classes she attended. And subsequent to that, Charles began to heal from his childhood accident, and he attributed his healing also to following this philosophy. So in 1889, Charles left his business and focused entirely on a prayer group that he called Silent Unity. He couldn't call it Christian Science because of a legal conflict with Mary Baker Eddy over the term. So again, the vernacular of the time was Christian Science, but he called it Silent Unity. So that sort of started Unity. They published a periodical called Modern Thought. And although Charles had no intention of making Unity into a church or denomination, his students wanted a more organized group. The legend goes that he was challenged to start a church. He said to the person, if you give me some money to start a church, I'll do it. And someone flipped him a nickel. And that nickel is still in the Unity archives, Unity Village. And so just a little story of how New Thought certainly leads to abundance and prosperity. The campus is, I think, 1,400 acres. It's a beautiful facility and has classes. It has a New Thought seminary, the Unity School of Christianity. It's a great retreat center. I would encourage you to visit it. It is a wonderful place. What's important here is that Charles and Myrtle both had health problems, and they believed that they were healed through their beliefs around God. That God is good and God is the source of all goodness in our life, and that we can heal through the power of our mind. That God is the source of all good. They also believed in the concept of unity in one mind, and this is important, that we can do prayer for others and not be in the same room with them, not be in the same location, that we share one mind, and in that belief system we are always connected to each other. Charles Fillmore is probably most widely known for his work in metaphysical Bible interpretation. He really took the Bible, took it apart with the help of another gentleman, and redefined all sorts of names, places, terms within the Bible. And when you use that as a reference, along with another book he wrote called The Revealing Word, it really opens up the Bible and Scripture to a new way of approach, a new way of thinking about what it means. And we use that today. So Unity continues to be the primary resource for metaphysical Bible interpretation. And Myrtle Fillmore's work in healing, she wrote many letters, and they're kind of codified into a book called Myrtle Fillmore's Healing Letters. They are really wonderful. At Unity Village, I pulled from the archives many of her letters between Emma Curtis Hopkins and herself, so there was a great kinship there, and so that's very interesting to us as well. So they both were prolific authors, writers, and influence us today, certainly. Here you see Myrtle Fillmore's Healing Letters and the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary that I mentioned before. Okay, so I want to give some mention to Emily Cady. Emily Cady was the author of what is now the Unity textbook, Lessons in Truth. She is really influential. The Lessons in Truth remains today a great New Thought book, a great introductory book to the principles of New Thought, certainly written in the language over time, but still most relevant today. It's, in essence, telling you that your life can be transformed by the power of your thoughts, words, and beliefs. She encourages you to find your truth as it's written in your own heart and to apply this in every aspect of your life. Now, she did study with Emma Curtis Hopkins, and she was inspired by biblical teachings and also, again, the ideas of Emerson. So you see this combination over and over again in these New Thought leaders. The book, Lessons in Truth, has sold, I don't know, over 2 million copies since it was published in 1896 at least. It is a bestseller. If she was an author today, she would be on the bestseller list and probably on Oprah. But she had an adventurous, self-reliant, can-do spirit. She chose a career in medicine. She was a homeopathic doctor in the 1880s. So to be a woman and be a doctor at that time was rare. And she was a doctor of homeopathic medicine in New York City. And as an established and successful physician, she first appeared on the scene at Unity. She had already written a booklet called Finding the Christ in Ourselves. Myrtle Fillmore saw it. She gave it to Charles Fillmore, and he asked her permission to print and distribute the booklet, and also for her to write for Unity magazine. So she started to write a series of articles that appeared in Unity magazine, and this became the Lessons in Truth. So she has great influence on the Unity movement and on the New Thought movement overall, and it's a book that I would highly recommend, which is Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. So last and certainly not least is Ernest Holmes. Ernest Shurtleff Holmes founded what later became known as the religious science movement, but was the author of The Science of Mind. And the science of mind wasn't necessarily a term he coined, but one he adopted for his teaching. It was first published in 1926, was later revised into the text we know today, but it's been a continuous publication since then. He was born in 1887 on a small farm in Maine. He didn't have a lot of formal education after the age of 18, other than his own personal study, which was extensive. But as a child, he mentally tangled with much of the teachings of his local church, local preachers. But he did study the Bible and the teachings of Jesus extensively. He was intrigued by the healings of Jesus and Jesus' works. And at the age of 18, he discovered the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he said, reading Emerson is like drinking water to me. So again, we see the confluence of the Bible, traditional Christianity, and Emerson. So Ernest Holmes also studied Christian Science, the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy. He was one of the last private students of Emma Curtis Hopkins, so that formed and shaped his thinking. And at the age of 25 in 1914, he discovered the writings of a gentleman called Thomas Troward, who I am not covering here, but Thomas Troward really was influential in his writings on mental science. So these ideas of mental science and the science of the mind and the law of the mind really influenced Holmes and ignited his ideas on metaphysics, at least what we call metaphysics within New Thought. And he kind of casually started speaking on Troward's writings. The groups got bigger and bigger. His ministry really began. His audiences grew. He became a great speaker. And He was ordained as a minister of the Divine Science Church and founded the Institute for the Study of the Science of Mind or Religious Science in Beverly Hills, California. And many of his followers wanted to form a church, and against his initial judgment, the churches of religious science were formed. So at the end of his life, he wrote over 30 books, was an extremely prolific author, but at the end of his life, he said that it probably was one of the worst things he did, which was to agree to the founding of a church, simply because it really got in the way of what he wanted to be as a teacher. The politics of churching involved Holmes as a split occurred, and he was heartbroken over some of what happened. But nonetheless, the churches were formed, and although in the tree we see that it was split into two churches, within the past 6 months, it is now again one church united under the Centers for Spiritual Living. So of course we have the Science of Mind textbook, which is the textbook for the Centers for Spiritual Living and their curriculum. Another book I want to point out is Living the Science of Mind. There are so many others. This Thing Called You is a favorite of mine, but many, many books are out there in your bookstores by Ernest Holmes. And here's a book among a few biographies of Ernest Holmes called Open at the Top. Those words are his. That was his philosophy, that he was open at the top, meaning he was always open and receptive to new ideas. He was open to a change in his beliefs, which, if you follow his writings from the beginning to the end of his life, many ideas did change or evolve and grow and develop. In 30 years, think of how much your consciousness has changed. So certainly his ideas expanded and grew and developed, and we are also, as New Thought students, always open at the top. Charles Fillmore also said he reserved the right to change his mind, and so do we. So lastly, I just want to point out two texts which are really among, again, many. They are in the bibliography document that is on the site. But the first is really the one that's used a great deal within ministerial training within our movement. It's called Spirits in Rebellion. It's by Charles Braden. It's called, they're subtitled The Rise and Development of New Thought. Really a kind of dense text, but if you really are interested in learning about the development of our movement, I would recommend it. And the other is one by Glenn Mosley, which I really, really like. It's a easier read, a smaller book. It's called The History and Future, New Thought, Ancient Wisdom. So this is really a wonderful book. Highly recommend it. So those are just two of many texts for you to take a look at. The rest I've included, as I said, in the bibliography document to this class. Wow, what a cast of characters that was. But I hope you enjoyed kind of seeing some of these key figures. They were all fascinating people and certainly revolutionaries in their time, as are all great thinkers, I believe. So I wanted you to understand and to see who they were, and when I refer to them, you'll kind of have it in the back of your mind. So that's kind of setting up where we're moving forward in the future classes within this course. And now we're going to move into basic principles, and it's not necessary for you to understand in depth what it is that I'm saying or presenting, but I will try to give you a general idea or general concepts of what's behind these principles in our belief system. So this is just kind of whetting your appetite about what it is that we believe and where you'll be moving in terms of spiritual exploration. So an exciting part, and let's go. So we now want to move into some of the basic New Thought principles, and I'm going to give you kind of two looks or two perspectives on it. The third perspective would be the Declaration of Principles by the Science of Mind. I'm going to use that in the next class. So the first one I want to give you is from Unity, and it's what they say are their 5 basic principles. It's written in many forms, but the principles, of course, are the same. The first says, God is the source and creator of all. There is no other enduring power. God is good and present everywhere. So here we have the idea of an omniscient and omnipresent God. Second, that we are spiritual beings created in God's image. The Spirit of God lives within each person. Therefore, all people are inherently good. This is the idea of ourselves as divine expressions. The third is that we create our life experiences through our way of thinking, and this is the power of thought. The power of thought and how it creates our life and experience. Fourth, that there is power in affirmative prayer, which we believe increases our connection to God. Affirmative prayer is our way of prayer in New Thought. We will discuss that in future classes. Fifth, that knowledge of these spiritual principles is not enough, we must live them. So this is a living teaching. We are always trying to expand our life, embody our principles and teachings, and create a better world. This is the Declaration of Principles from INTA, or the International New Thought Alliance. We affirm God as mind, infinite being, spirit, ultimate reality. So this is God as we define it in many names. I want to point out we define God as mind, or God-mind. We affirm that God, the good, is supreme, universal, and everlasting. So these are the omnis of God: omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. We affirm the unity of God and humanity in that the divine nature dwells within and expresses through each of us by means of our acceptance of it as health, supply, wisdom, love, life, truth, power, beauty, and peace. So that the divine nature is all of these wonderful things that are ours to express and that are ours by divine birthright. We affirm the power of prayer and the capacity of each person to have mystical experience with God and to enjoy the grace of God. So again, the power of prayer. Affirm the freedom of all persons as to beliefs and honor the diversity of humanity by being open and affirming of all persons, affirming the dignity of human beings as founded on the presence of God within them, and therefore the principle of democracy. So basically, we are an all-inclusive teaching. We exclude no one. No persuasion, no color, no anything. We are completely accepting of all people. We affirm that we are all spiritual beings dwelling in a spiritual universe that is governed by spiritual law, and that in alignment with this spiritual law we can heal, prosper, and harmonize. So this is the crux of our teaching, and we'll be talking about this in more detail in the next class. We affirm that our mental states are carried forward into manifestation and become our experience in daily living. We affirm the manifestation of the kingdom of heaven here and now. We affirm expression of the highest spiritual principle in loving one another unconditionally. So here we really are reaffirming the teachings of Jesus and, of course, many other enlightened teachers. Promoting the highest good for all, teaching and healing one another, ministering to one another, and living together in peace in accordance with the teachings of Jesus and other enlightened teachers. We affirm our evolving awareness of the nature of reality and our willingness to refine our beliefs accordingly. So again, here the idea that we are open at the top. So let's take a look at world religions by percentage in this little pie chart graph. And we really technically are within this 12.48% of other religions, even though we're really not a religion, but we are in other belief systems. But we also have pulled ideas from the non-religious because we are a spiritual belief system, and we have many non-religious students that come to us for an exploration of their spirituality. So not religious, but spiritual. Certainly Christians, we have many who come to us from the Christian belief system, and we pull from much of the Christian belief system. We have Muslims who attend our churches. Many people retain their original beliefs and come to us and integrate our teaching with theirs. Hindus, certainly Buddhists. We have many Buddhist basic tenets and principles within ourselves. So we really want to look at this not really by world religions by percentage, but that we share with all religious traditions and even the non-religious traditions or peoples. We are really everyone. We really share the resonant truth of everyone, all teachings, the common truth, the tie that binds, the common unity that we all are. So these are all thought systems that influence us. And so we really are, as a teaching, the wisdom of the ages. We really are the embodiment of the common truth, or the inherent truth, or the relentless truth that comes from all traditions, from all times, and from all around the world. Okay, so we've come to a close for Class 1, New Thought Basics. And we have taken a look at some of the key players involved in our movement, some of the antecedents that came before them. We started in the beginning with some metaphysical interpretation of scriptures, and we've also taken a look at the Big Bang. We've taken a look at how we fit into world religion and seen that we are a wonderful mixture of many thought systems and belief systems, and that's where you fit in, because you really come here with your own belief system, and you not only add to us, but hopefully we add to you. We're always here to complement each other and to continue to evolve our spiritual selves into the greatest expressions that we can be. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it informative, and I hope it started to kindle in you some thinking, some ideas, some questions, and some desire to continue to explore your spiritual evolution with me. So thank you for joining me for Class 1, and I hope to see you in Class 2. And so as we close our first class, I would invite you to join me for a moment of prayer. So I invite you to get comfortable and join me in consciousness. We know there is only one mind, visible and invisible, known and unknown. This is the source of our creativity, of love and joy, and the self-expression of God. God is right where we are. God is the power in our life. In this perfect now moment, we recognize our unity with God. The perfect action of God guides, guards, and sustains us. We are alert to new ideas and know that they are the flow of infinite intelligence working in and through us. We let go of uncertainty in our lives, reminding ourselves of the love that is always surrounding us. Our path is filled with joy and prosperity. The beauty of all life inspires us, and we give thanks for this truth. We accept this as the truth of our being right now and release it. We believe that our word has power, and we know it is done right now. And so it is.